In this video, a Reddit user shared, Super AITK for questioning a charge for unexpected services. Throwaway account just to be careful. Sorry it's a long one. I'll try at TLDR at the bottom. Yesterday, a chap knocked at our door. I live with my parents and brother. My dad answered and he told us he'd been doing some roofing work for a neighbor, had some leftover material and would happily do a little bit of aesthetic work for £300. My dad said yes, but at the time, regretted it, and shortly after these guys got to work, was told that our ridge tiles, the joins where the roof meets at the top, were loose and would need to be replaced. They had removed one tile and said that the whole job would cost an additional £1,850. Again, my dad agreed to this, signed an estimate of the work and cost, and the guys said they'd be back the next day, today, to do the work, as it would need to be done before it got windy or wet. Later on in the day, my dad said he felt like he was being conned, but because he'd said yes and signed something, felt he had to go ahead. I eventually convinced him to call them to discuss the cost, ask them to not come do the work until he'd got some other quotes or opinions. The paper he'd signed was not a contract, and there was a 14-day grace period to cancel any work agreed. The guy told him it was that cost because it was tile replacement and installation of a dry ridge system. So, my dad, again, just went okay, despite my research online showing the average cost of labor and materials was more like £1,000. They came today, 2 lads did the work in less than 2 hours, and the man we'd been speaking to, the boss I assume, agreed to come back to give my dad bank details to pay. They'd left a box which had contained the kit they used, and the supplier, and when I looked it up it was £36 plus VAT for 6 meters. Something just didn't feel right about the price to me, and my dad still agreed. Instead of the boss, another guy came for payment and asked for cash for the £1,850. My dad refused as bank transfer had been agreed. He then offered to knock £100 off if paid by cash. Dad still refused. I also asked for an invoice before any payment would be made. This guy went off on the phone, and 5 minutes later the boss appeared at the door. When I asked for an invoice, he pointed at the estimate my dad had signed and said, "That's it." I questioned this, as there was no breakdown of the costs. I asked if we could get an invoice with the breakdown of labor, materials, etc. The boss just said, "I don't do it like that." I asked again to see the breakdown of the costing, as £1,850 felt like a lot of money for the work that was carried out. He just kept saying he didn't do it like that. The estimate sheet was the invoice. Was I not happy with the work? What's the problem? I said it was nothing to do with the quality of the work. I just wanted to see an invoice that broke down the costing to make sure my dad wasn't being taken advantage of. I did say that the whole situation felt a little dodgy. This went round in circles, and every time I said something, the guy just looked at my dad. Perhaps I'm reading into it, but couldn't help but feel that as I'm a young woman, he was being very dismissive of me. At one point, he just went, "Who owns the house?" as a response, as if it's nothing to do with me, even though it's my dad I'm trying to protect, and I live in the house too. When I mentioned the box and cost I'd researched, he got flustered and said, "What box?" In the end, my dad just asked me to leave it and he would just pay because he didn't want any trouble. And afterwards, he even said that I was right. He knew he was being conned, but just wanted to get it over with and forget about it. Was I being a Karen for questioning the costing and asking for an invoice? At no point did I say we wouldn't pay, just wanted the documentation and breakdown of cost to make sure we weren't being overcharged. The whole thing felt suspect, especially when they really tried to get it paid in cash despite having previously agreed on bank transfer, along with how reluctant he was to provide an invoice or cost breakdown. TLDR, tradesman offers to do £300 of roofing work. We didn't contact them, they randomly came to our door. Says we need an additional £1,850 of work done the next day. Dad says yes, but questioned the cost prior to work, but agreed. Only signed an estimate of cost. After work completed within 2 hours, tradesman asked for cash despite agreeing bank transfer. Refused and asked for invoice. Would not give invoice. Said he doesn't do it that way. I kept asking for breakdown of the cost in an invoice, would not do this and got defensive. Dad paid in the end, despite agreeing with me about it being dodgy. Was I a Karen for challenging the costing and asking for the invoice?